Good evening. I hope you're having a wonderful week of May Day pro-worker activities. I'm Yohanan Ben Zion, the voice crying out in the wilderness, crying out for a technological New Jerusalem. Emphasis on the technological. Right? There is no point in trying to build a livable world which requires a humane and sustainable economic system to stop the US-run capitalist climate apocalypse. There's no point in trying to build that world if it's only going to be supplanted by something almost as bad. And when you're talking about the Abrahamic traditions or religious literalism more generally, or the overwhelming majority of cultural baggage, you're talking about things that are built on those bad fundamentals. Bourgeois institutions replacing other bourgeois institutions, even if those that they are replacing are the more virulent. Still not a recipe for a livable world. And so when I have this nom de guerre, Jan Ben Zion, pretty easy to track what that would mean. Voice crying out in the wilderness for a technological New Jerusalem. That's not the name I was born with. It doesn't reflect some kind of religious inclination, Judeo-Christian or otherwise. It's just a. Again, I hope you'll grant me that poetic license to use this kind of language generally, like referencing a New Jerusalem, when what we're really talking about on this program is an AI-powered um, new kind of political economy, which I've described at great length in these shows. And advanced computing, so-called artificial intelligence, is the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, bar none. It's not being used in that way, to the degree that it should in the Western world. In the U.S., where we think of AI as something to do with these tech whales or other military-industrial complex compatible features. But I would ask you to be fastidious in repudiating those bourgeois tech institutions. They have not accomplished anything in terms of the technology itself, really, or the betterment of humankind. As I give the example of Salvador Allende's Chile, which was building a technological planned economy called Cybersyn. That wasn't merely theorized or proposed, it was being built. A technological planned economy that would have been a springboard to the people's superintelligence, a livable world. That was being built, but that was sabotaged quite quickly and without any compunction whatsoever by the fascist United States and the imperialist powers that support them. And this is something that's held back an AI takeoff by many, many decades. A world revolution of an advanced technological kind could have occurred in the 20th century or around the year 2000, but it's been held back. And these people, Henry Kissinger was brains, such as they were. Henry Kissinger was a huge fuck up. Right? He didn't really succeed in things. You wouldn't consider the U.S.'s most notorious loss in a war to be a success. You wouldn't consider killing many, many millions of people, depopulating much of Southeast Asia, or a solid percentage of Southeast Asia, as being a great success. But he failed up over and over again by ingratiating himself to the power structures, deeply perverse power structures of the U.S. and Western world. Henry Kissinger was a architect of the destruction of that technological planned economy, which is not distinct from something that's happened dozens of times in Latin America alone, much less the rest of the world. It's a much larger number. That is U.S. destroying the political and economic system of the country because it was just the threat sometimes of it not doing the bidding of private wealth. And the in the case of Allende's Chile, it's different because this could have been more of an influence like that of the Soviet Union's introducing state socialism to the world, but this more advanced technological outcome accelerating even more what state socialism did. The main thing that anyone should say about state socialism is before state socialism there was industrial capitalism, which doubled life expectancy over the course of over a century, and that state socialism was able to achieve that same thing, doubling of life expectancy in a much shorter time frame, about a quarter of a century. So a 4 to 5-fold increase in the acceleration of human betterment. That's not what's mainly said. People have perverse preoccupation with power politics centering the bourgeoisie rather than centering human beings. And so you'll find people, there's this person I follow on Twitter called Just a Thought. Pretty nice person, yeah. Anti-establishment Jewish woman, pro-Palestine, but really not a serious thinker, not a scientific communist, that is. And this person is, when they bring up the subject of state socialism, they tend to do that very thing, blame the victim of the bourgeois violence. And I said this much to this person not too long ago. I said, basically, in as few words as possible, he would say that the USSR was forced to become a misnomer. The word Soviet was tending, as conceived in the earliest stages by Comrade Lenin, was tending to be building something more like council communism. But they realized that they would be constantly attacked in the way that they were in the so-called Russian Civil War by these bourgeois forces, and they had to build something more like war communism. Of course, these are all pretty simplistic, reductive explanations of these ideologies and what actually happened, but it's basically they were forced to become warlike, forced to engage with this power politics, and so human beings are victimized, just in the way that the United States sabotaging every continent, preventing it from having viable political and economic systems, forcing it to have more bourgeois economic systems is not generally seen by Westerners. That's what happened. They just say, well, socialism doesn't work. You have to sabotage every single instance of something not just being totally captured by financial capital. That's not that economic system that's failing. That's financial capital that's interfering with the ordinary running of human affairs. And it's very hard to get people who are not scientific communists to have a serious conversation about this kind of thing, like our friend Just a Thought. That's why it's accurate to say that any anti-establishment person who's not guided by proletarian ideology is effectively crypto-fascist. You can't be anti-establishment if you're also anti-communist. It's simply impossible. And anti-communism basically is fascism. That is the defining feature of 20th century happenings. You say it's very confusing looking at the Axis powers in the First World War or the Second World War and saying, well, what the hell was even going on here? It's just Franz Ferdinand got shot. It's a bad war because of that. It makes almost no sense. But it makes a lot more sense when you recognize that basically all of the actors involved, except for some in the increasingly less so in the Second World War, but All of the actors involved were um, imperialist powers who would, in some rare cases, run afoul of one another. It's more accurate to not refer to fascist power at all, but refer to imperialist powers that run afoul of one another. And when you know what the bourgeoisie is, they don't actually care about any of the human beings involved. They don't care that Germans are killing Britishers. They don't care about that. They just care about maintaining financial capital and empire. Um, uh, then you can understand, um, you know, I forget who it was. Maybe George E. Lukács wrote a whole book about how the Second World War was really 7 different wars, and most of them, a lot of it was inter-imperialist war, um, and so you can begin to understand. You can begin to understand um, the world around you today, the world that our friend Just the Thought mostly fails to understand, even though they are legitimately critical of the United States or Israel or imperial forces to some degree, um, with by immersing yourself in a proletarian ideology, by making a study of scientific communism and very closely related disciplines. You know, it's an open question to scientific communists the degree to which you are learning something by reading, Chomsky, David Graeber, or people who are more strident critics of state socialism. You know, I've tended to recommend Alexander Berkman, an audiobook about anarcho-communism. It's not because I think that it's a really good idea to be putting the anarcho prefix in front of things in your labors, but rather because it does offer some insights into the building of full communism um, beyond the 20th century workings of state socialism. But it's an open question, right? David Graeber wrote some pretty good books. David Graeber is not a scientific communist. He does sometimes, but quite rarely, insinuate some kind of anti-communist language into what he's doing. Chomsky is um, um, pretty, pretty, pretty clearly controlled opposition in this respect. You see in the 70s or 80s Noam Chomsky complaining about how he's prevented from really becoming a mainstream figure by the forces of financial capital and empire with neoliberal goons, which is true. But in a certain sense, like the fame that he does have is granted to him only because he does have that anti-communist strain. So the people who are real revolutionaries are prevented from having that position even more so. And that's overwhelmingly the case, and has been the case for as long as the CIA-run world has existed, which basically, is thinking of this in terms of definitions of modernity. Like until the 1920s, the United States and every country had totally open borders. At which time, very quickly, all of these bourgeois so-called liberal democracies adopted um, um, immigration policies that, at that time and to this day, have every bourgeois institution, every bourgeois government has elements of their immigration policy that is basically indistinguishable from a genocidal policy. Right? The closed border system is a genocidal policy, and this is a pretty defining moment of moving from the thing that existed for a century or more prior, to some degree in many lands, industrial capitalism, and a thing that had existed for longer still, colonialism, to a financial capital and neo-colonialist world that we would associate with the 20th century and 21st century. And um, this um, there's no coming to any of these conclusions. There's no coming to any of these conclusions. There's no understanding this without immersing yourself in quite a lot, of literature. Saw on Twitter there's a question asking folks, um, presumably scientific communist folks or folks in that general area, what was the first Marxist work you read? And I was reflecting on this. I couldn't quite pinpoint it because I read um, 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 the Communist Manifesto when I was a teenager, maybe 13. But I was not a Marxist at that time, and I really didn't become a Marxist until about the age of 40. And so what was I really doing for those 27 years? Well, it's a little hazy in terms of the books I was reading. I definitely read some Parenti books, which are pretty close to being solid Marxian books. The only major criticism of Parenti's work is from Landback or Fanonian perspective, which are valid, but by and large, his work is quite consistent, and of course, overtly and consistently Marxist. But I couldn't quite pinpoint who the first Marxian, not actually Marx. Marx did not describe himself as a Marxist. I mean, it would be a little weird for anybody who would be to describe themselves as a follower of himself. But also, he didn't agree with every single thing that everyone calling himself a Marxist was doing, and besides, in his lifetime. And the well, I titled this talk "Perverse Incentives," as I'll talk a little bit about what was happening from those years, 13 to 40, and it was only quite recently that I was in a position to make a study of scientific communism and to try, I don't know the degree to which I've done this, but to try to articulate a creative Marxist um, um, intellectual labor in fleshing out some ideas in cybernetic communism. Advanced computing is the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, and the application of advanced computing at a large scale, the application of systems, besides, cybernetics is not just about techno-scientific outcomes or advanced technology or advanced computing even. It is really about the systems. The major works that were written on this subject predate by a few years the existence of computing systems at all. Norbert Wiener was articulating advanced systems before, in anticipation of the existence of things like advanced computing or even computing systems at all. But those things did not exist. You could say that Norbert Wiener was, of course, the father of cybernetics, but you could say this of any number of other people writing about these things at that time. So the missing ingredient for you in building a livable world, in building full communism, this is one and the same project, is something like this thing that I talk about a lot, this open source large language model that's able to approximate human activity, and but almost endlessly replicable, and that injection into this world of systems of something more powerful and more by its nature proletarian is the difference between this hyper-capitalistic world of the West that we live in, the U.S. CIA-run world that we live in, saying that they're going to bring about something like an AI takeoff, but really what they're doing is bringing about the accelerated, these are accelerationists, the accelerated demise of humankind. greater destruction. That's even mostly what they will say, right? That's what an accelerationist will say, is we're going to hasten the destruction of institutions. Um, but scientific communists also want to dismantle those institutions, right? But the difference between those two is one of them is just doing damage to bring about some other bourgeois institution. The other one is engaging in a righteous people's war against these things that are killing humankind. It's a very big distinction there, and by and large, people who lie about that distinction, people like transhumanists, bourgeois transhumanists, for example, these are people who they're pretty specifically lying about that difference between this hyper-capitalistic phenomena and the righteous people's war. They would not object to the idea that advanced computing is the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, but their definition of revolution is wrong. By and large, it's just incoherent. It's complete whitewashing of the concept. And so I didn't come to I didn't come to this position of being able to make a study of this until basically I retired from teaching. I was able around the time of the coronavirus outbreak to be retired and studying this these subjects in a way that I hadn't before. Before, from those years to say 13 to 40, I'd wanted to be a person like that, but I didn't even have the language. Right? How could you possibly do the intellectual labor of doing something like attempting to make some contribution to cybernetic communism, this thing which would be a springboard to full communism or people's government in every land? Read the People's Republic of Walmart if you want to really understand how high automation and the proliferation of advanced computing could be the missing ingredient there. It is, by and large, bourgeois work, the People's Republic of Walmart. So if you haven't read a fair amount of scientific communist works, you need to read those first. And you need to inoculate yourself from ingesting bourgeois filth otherwise. So I didn't even have the language to say, this word intellectual labor, it's a proletarian phrase. Right? I wanted to be this person who would be capable of doing something, might be minimally capable of doing something of historical significance. I don't assert that I am capable of, or that I have come anywhere close to doing that, but I'm trying. But I wanted to be that person who was trying from age 13 to 40, but I did not have the time and did not have, had not been in a position to shed the bourgeois ideological baggage, And what was happening to me when I was 13 years old? Well, the person that you see before you is not the person who should have been. That's to say, I would have been a person more visibly gender rebellious and queer, less heterosexual, but that was kind of beaten out of me around that time by just a host of male associates and figures in my life, or patriarchal figures, and that is so. Another thing that happened in this time frame of being retired is becoming asexual, right? I would contend that that's a good choice for anyone, right? The planet is dying, okay? So your duty, your first responsibility, is not to have children and care for them. Your first well, if the planet is dying, you're dooming them by doing that. Your first responsibility is to stop the U.S. run, U.S. military-industrial complex caused um, a capitalist climate apocalypse. Stop that from happening. And then when that's no longer in process, you can maybe reflect on what your next goals might be. Just having children. I shouldn't even have to say that out loud. That should seem pretty obvious to everyone, but no one thinks in these terms. Virtually no one. 1 in 1,000 U.S. people is not just a person who, if you just shot them, the world would be better off. Like, you can't really negotiate with them. You just have to shoot them. That's 1 in 1,000 people who wouldn't fit that description in the United States. Less so in other places. It's unfortunate that it'd just be easier to shoot Americans than try to work with them. But that's also reality. And this, I was one of these people for some decades, right? I was raised by Christian fascists. They beat this various forms of bourgeois ideology into me, and my actions have reflected that. It's easy to look at this thing of saying now I'm an asexual as through an ideological lens, because that's how I'm generally presenting it. But it's also, it's for those 2 odd decades, just me behaving like a maniac and realizing that I shouldn't do that. Right? Realizing I wasn't capable of having a healthy relationship or treating people with respect, and even with this um, dialectical materialist principles guiding my actions today, it still might not really be capable of that. Even if the planet wasn't dying and didn't have to set that sort of thing aside, it still might not be capable of that. But that's not unique to me. Being sexually reckless or destructive. This is a thing that you would say of every straight and cisgendered person, overwhelmingly all straight or cisgendered males. And so you, who have not immersed yourself in praxis, not just scientific communist thought, but scientific communist activity, if you're able to do more in terms of revolutionary action than you are in terms of study, God bless you. But almost no one. It's just some kind of natural revolutionary genius, right? You have to study these things. You don't even know how you're not capable of doing intellectual labor or revolutionary labor of a real kind until you have that language. You can't even move in that direction until you understand what the objectives are. So you might say, then it's probably just as well that you're this asexual person now. Okay, but that's an individualist. That's an individualist analysis, and an individualist analysis is, by its nature, a bourgeois analysis. The real issue is things like stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse, so that we can have a world where human beings continue to reproduce and proliferate, live joyous lives. Are they able to do that? What human beings were living joyous lives in antiquity or under the thumb of financial capital, which all of human beings in the last 500 years have been under the thumb of, almost all. This is, there's no joy in my pill. I would encourage you to try to study. I give an easy kind of life hack kind of approach to this to a lot of people. Everyone I talk to, I say, you can put one earbud in. As somebody, if you're at work and somebody says, "What do you have one earbud in for? What are you doing? What is this one earbud? You're supposed to be working. You're my slave. You're my wage slave. You have to be working right now. You can't have one earbud in." You say, "I'm expecting an important call," but you're not expecting an important call, right? But you just tell them to stuff it up their ass if they want to give you a hard time about it, keeping an earbud in. But what you're really doing is um, listening to this playlists, like these long playlists of scientific communist audiobooks that I routinely share. And you can then, when you're going about your ordinary business, or being forced into wage slavery, whatever the case may be, you can be immersing yourself in this thing that would make you something more than that, more than a slave. There's no guarantee that you'll win, but there is a guarantee that you can be better than you are. But we have no choice but to win, right? We have to win. This capitalist climate apocalypse caused overwhelmingly by the U.S. empire. It is something that has brought us now to the precipice. We have until roughly 2029, maybe 2030, maybe sooner, to change dramatically the industrial bases, particularly abolishing these military-industrial complexes. The $1 trillion a year world first polluter that is the U.S. military-industrial complex. We have to abolish these other allied bourgeois military-industrial complexes. We have to dramatically transform up to the point of near abolition the fossil fuel sectors across the boards, not just automotive, but across the boards, to the point that would not cause supply chain collapses. We have to also recognize that livestock systems, by a raw estimation, 51% of the total human contribution to this runaway overheating effect or other climate change effects. And then we have to have more or less a near abolition of livestock systems. And if we are able to do those three things in that time frame, then we won't see a mega billion person loss of life. We won't see a dramatic loss of life and displacement beyond what's already occurred. We can't completely reverse those effects, but we can stop them getting dramatically worse if we do those things. But you have very, very, very little of people who are the most culpable, right? The American bourgeoisie and the American capitalistic and fascistic sympathizer. These are the people most responsible for this. But you have virtually nothing that's being done by these people to stop it. What you have is denial of this. I was talking to some people about this. It came up in a couple of different conversations like this pretty recently. How the Trumpist American phenomena of the last decade is similar to the know-nothings of the 1800s of the United States. Different subject. That subject more to do with chattel slavery. This subject more to do with the omnicide. But it's the same response. These people, and this includes liberals and conservatives. Those are all capitalist pigs. There's no point in differentiating one capitalist pig from another. So all of these people, capitalist sympathizers of the United States, they understand on some level that the United States is directly responsible, most responsible for killing off humanity with this climate apocalypse that's caused by this $1 trillion a year abomination, the world's worst polluter, the U.S. military-industrial complex, protecting all of the other super polluters, creating an inescapable regime of super pollution. They understand that the bourgeoisie is responsible for this. They understand that they themselves, as upholders of this, capitalists and fascist sympathizers, they understand that they are responsible, but they are unwilling to do what needs to be done. That's why a person who's pushing back against the abolition of livestock systems, many people call themselves communists, will resist this. They say, "Oh, you're just being a nerd. You're a vegan. You're just being a nerd." That's a bourgeois ideology rearing its ugly head. That's the thing that you inoculate yourself against by reading scientific communist works. They're unwilling to do all of the things that need to be done by any means necessary to stop this climate death spiral from occurring. So because they're unwilling to do all the things that need to be done, they adopt some kind of perverse a worldview in a mass formation. The widespread adoption of a completely insane worldview, embracing this person whose defining feature, Donald Trump's defining feature, is being the most notorious climate denier in history. They embrace him, or in the case of liberals, they don't embrace him, but they criticize him on some other bases that have very little to do with stopping the climate apocalypse. What point is being made by saying you don't like Donald Trump if you're also a person upholding neoliberal and neoconservative domestic and foreign economic policies that are killing the planet? Right? You're also an equally bad person, just not as colorful or something, right? So all of these people, all of these capitalist and fascistic sympathizers take on this insane worldview. And all of this is a response to entrenched bourgeois ideology and a cognitive dissonance, an unwillingness to jettison that ideology, but more significantly to do what needs to be done to ensure the continued survival of humankind. Um, um, think when I said, that it's easier, except for 1 in 1,000 or so, it would be easier to summarily execute Americans than to try and fix them. You know, and you say, "Oh, Ben, Jesus, that's insane. That's an insane thing to say." But think about how many people you know who are not would not have elements of what I just described. I doubt very much that you can think of people that you know in real life who don't have those elements, right? Maybe if you are very, very advanced as an organizer, as a comrade, as a scientific communist insurrectionist, and there's a chance that you know some people in real life who are among those 1 in 1,000 who are not just going to hell. But it's very, very unlikely that you met such people. It's very, very unlikely that you're not, to some degree, some such person. In the years of the decade prior to immersing myself in the study of scientific communism, I thought of myself as a Marxist adjacent, right? I thought of myself as somebody who was trying to be a good person, but I was still doing those things, still consuming animal products, for example, or still chasing women around, for example, treating people with disrespect. I was still doing 100 different bad things that I shouldn't have been doing, and that's the difference. And I'm happy. I'm happy to say that I was in the wrong. This person that I used to be, I'm happy to say it, but that's not a solid analysis. That's an individualist analysis. You have to have also a proletarian analysis as well, and say that this is everyone. This is everyone, and the degree to which you can resist that, it varies from place to place, right? The United States is a place that's cooked, absolutely cooked, by Project Mockingbird type effects of being forced into a pipeline of bourgeois ideology in a way that other places are not to the same degree. But of course, every bourgeois nation state is going to have that to a pretty high degree, irrespective of whether they have effects of things like just bringing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Nazis or far rightists from other countries. The United States, there was a time when the United States, in the earliest years of the United States building the CIA-run world, where a literal Nazi, a literal person leaving the Third Reich in Germany, was in charge of the CIA. They putting people like this, literal Nazis, in positions of power across practically every discipline, practically every field, practically every sector. Um, so it's not hard to see how this thing has become effectively fascist in every way that matters when that was the case. When you have this Project Mockingbird effect, which is really just media brainwashing. of a bourgeois kind. You can't get away from it, right? But you can start to get away from it by studying this sort of thing and by doing revolutionary work besides. Sometimes you see people on Twitter.com saying that the most important thing in praxis really is the revolutionary work, um, which is a true statement if it were said absent context there. But by and large, when people are saying that, they're responding to someone pushing them to actually study scientific communist works, which is not an appropriate response, right? The appropriate response to saying you need to read more is thank you, sir, may I have another. Not making excuses for why you're not reading, right? That's a dumb thing to do in any situation. Um, and you can tell who those people are, that they're people who are still carrying that bourgeois ideological baggage around. Like, you can see what they're saying generally that that's the case, but that's a big tell. A person saying that they don't need to study, but if you come to me in a position to have a solid working understanding of the running of a people's government or a people's organization, the solid working understanding of this collection of fields, not limited to scientific communism, but basically being a scientific communist, then you can also be in a position to be doing work better still toward bringing about that revolutionary outcome. But you're not going to be any of those things if you're a person who's pushing back on the idea of having the working knowledge, right? You don't have the working knowledge to be revolutionary. I'm trying to think. It was a serious African thinker. I'm trying to think of who it was. It might have been Thomas Sankara, who said, a person. I'm quite certain that it was Thomas Sankara. Said a person absent that. And I'm paraphrasing here. A person absent that revolutionary education. A person lacking that revolutionary education is as likely to become a criminal as a revolutionary. More likely to become a criminal than a revolutionary. And that's who you are. That's who you are when you're saying defending the right to be a criminal instead of serious comrade. When you're pushing back on the necessity of that revolutionary education. And if you're doing it in the United States, a place where it's just an open air lunatic asylum, and because of bourgeois ideology, I mean, forget about it. You're a crypto-fascist. If you're doing it somewhere else, a place that already has this possibility for a revolutionary education, say some misdemeanor offense. But if you're doing it in the United States, your mind is gone. but you'll find an awful lot of people calling themselves comrades who do that thing. Well, this is the cybernetic communism conversation. I've touched upon some of that, but I didn't really talk as much as I usually do about the prospect of building this cybernetic communist world. That is, building a livable world. You can't build a livable world if you don't use the tools at your disposal, right? A proto-communistic form, a form that was absent class distinction. It has existed in human history, right? The good Native American folks of centuries past, before the Columbian Exchange, so-called, lived in that world, right? They had little class distinction, and they did do quite advanced things. It's an anti-native trope that they were not engaging in agriculture. Right? They were engaging in very advanced agricultural projects, but what they weren't doing is allowing those projects to center on private wealth and the theft from people. They lived in a classless society, but that classless society had a life expectancy of 40 or 45 years. That's a low life expectancy, right? You don't want to live in a world that is a classless society where people live a shorter time than they do in a bourgeois society. That's a poor prize. It's poor prize. So this possibility of using techno-scientific advancement, and particularly revolutionary potential beyond that of others, of advanced computing, the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, that is, um, um, you can build this world in a short time, a shorter time than you could, say, by the 20th century revolutionary standards. If we have only less than 5 years to build a livable world, um, then why would you not use the dramatically most useful weapon at your disposal, um, advanced computing, to do that? You're less likely to succeed if you only hold yourself to the insurrectionist weapons of times past, and if you only allow yourself to use them, those. So that those things, the building of a 21st century society, and that exigency have to be a part of what you're doing. And generally speaking, it's not a part of what scientific communists say or do. Very few people would call themselves cybernetic communists. So very few people recognize um, these most essential things: the need for proletarian ideology, and the need to recognize advanced computing as the most powerful revolutionary weapon. In fact, many scientific communists would accuse people more like cybernetic communists of being, say, too technologically deterministic. But that's not really the problem, right? Um, um, the problem is the real contradiction here is this ticking time bomb of the capitalist climate apocalypse, and how to best diffuse that time bomb. And I have tried in recent years, as I said a few times already in this conversation. I don't know with any certainty that I could possibly in my life move the needle or towards cybernetic communism, but I've tried. At least tried to begin to articulate some of that. So let's talk about this open source large language model workforce as a significant concept there. This thing that was built into a 21st century analysis, this thing like the this world described in the Republic of Walmart concept, that that is a significant prospect, the ability to build full communism. And this this open source LLM agent, this AI bot, as an analog to a worker, not as an analog to the bourgeoisie, but as an analog to the worker, as a massified workforce multiplier. So an individual AI bot, it matters very little whether it's bourgeois or pro-worker, whether its function is bourgeois or pro-worker. But when you have workforce multiplication in play, and when it is correctly massified, then you have something that is genuinely, truly a thing that is able to build a livable world, which means building full communism and full cybernetic communism in our time. And it has to be in our time, right? We're sitting on that ticking time bomb. We have no choice but to become cybernetic communists right now, and to take up arms to that end besides. Um, and so this massified work group as workforce multiplier, and the transformation to a cybernetic communist society that we must undertake. Um, this this is an ability to realign all of our institutions and all of the malformed sectors, ones that must be absolutely in this time frame, this 5 year or so time frame, be abolished or nearly abolished, but also all of the other malformed sectors and institutions besides. These have to be realigned with core cybernetic communist ideals, and they have to be restructured in that time frame. And that is a world where things like research and development, or more broadly, resource allocation, become very different creatures. We haven't lived in this world where something like advanced computing powered single payer public health service becomes able to treat disease so well that it is even able to reverse the effects of decrepitude. This is something that bourgeois personalities, technologists, or even people who are openly for radical life extension, like say Ray Kurzweil, will frequently say that if you live to a certain age, if you live to around the year 2040, that you will have lived to longevity escape velocity. But those people are generally not contributing to longevity escape velocity. They're deranged to think that they are, because they're upholding the systems that have held that back, right? Right. Ray Kurzweil is not substantively different from Henry Kissinger in his ideology. He's a neoliberal ideologue as well. Just didn't literally pull the trigger on shooting a bunch of people, but is equally intertwined in the system that did and does, and equally entwined in the system that I described as hyper-capitalist killing of Earth, rather than the true outcome that would derive from something like a people's superintelligence. The bourgeois superintelligence is not a thing. It's not a thing to be upheld. It's not a thing to lionize. It's a thing to be destroyed and replaced by the people's superintelligence. But we've not lived in that world where something like a people's AI takeoff and the upgrading of systems like an AI-powered public health service would lead to longevity escape velocity, or radical life extension, or universal super longevity, the term that I coined to describe this, because by and large the people interested in longevity are not interested in universal longevity, right? So they're lessening their chance, right? There have been force multipliers in play well before advanced computing, such as just the ability to build a public health service that doubles life expectancy in a quarter of a century, or contributes palpably to that under state socialism. There have been workforce multiplying effects of proletarian institutions that these people bend over backwards to ignore or deny. So they're part of the problem. And you really won't find a transhumanist, a singularitarian, any of the TESCREAL folks who are less overtly accelerationist, or sometimes they have accelerationist in the name, right? Some of the TESCREAL includes people that are calling themselves effective accelerationists. That's to say, tech accelerationists rather than the kind of far-rightist brinksmanship of the term accelerationism generally. But they're still far-rightists. They just don't want to be described in terms of brinksmanship, but they are bringing us to the brink of extinction. They just don't. They just are. They resent being called what they really are. But fuck them, right? All of these TESCREAL people, they're animals, right? They're just animals. They and their ideology and their efforts and their institutions that they uphold or that they want to build, they're worthless. They're utterly worthless. But by coming to this point of being this more enlightened person, a person who would necessarily have to study cybernetic communism, you can see that the bad things that they're doing are put to the side, and the good things that they would say they want to do but are incapable of doing could actually be done. But that requires a specific synthesis, a convergence of advanced artificial intelligence philosophy and advanced systems philosophy with scientific communist ideology into the cybernetic communist project. And this, um, the difference between this is the difference between extinction or continued human survival and thriving. Right, thriving unlike anything that's been possible in the past. To say that there's a possibility easily within our time of an advanced computing powered single payer public health service that gives everyone the ability to live as long as they want. That is not a thing that's a thing that you could have been put in a mental asylum for saying just a few decades ago. I want to live forever. You'd say, someone would say that you won't live forever, and the fact that you believe that you could live forever makes you a lunatic. You know, it's something you could be put in a lunatic asylum for. But things change, and that is a viable option. But it's not viable if you listen to lunatics like Ray Kurzweil, or allow yourself to be influenced by lunatics like Peter Thiel, because those people, they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. They're saying that they want a good outcome, but what they're actually doing is preventing the truly good outcome. That is why an anti-communist is a fascist. There was no such thing as a fascist or fascistic institution before the time when those bourgeois nation states started throwing up borders, throwing up these basically genocidal institutions. There were bourgeois institutions before the 1920s, but there were not fascist institutions. Just the thing that I alluded to at the top of the show, the confusion about what the First World War was or the Second World War was. All of that really boils down to institutionalized anti-communism. The forces of the bourgeoisie rallying to prevent the abolition of financial capital and or even the full abolition of private wealth. Boy, they did a great job, right? But what's the reward? What's the reward for destroying the possibility for a viable political system in almost every land and replacing it with casino capitalism, predatory capitalism, and fascistic capitalism in almost every land? What's the reward? Well, they've killed the whole planet. And you should have no confusion ever about who these people are. Anyone to the right of someone who wants to see the full abolition of private wealth is a force of the bourgeoisie. That includes many of the people, most of the people in this world who call themselves socialists, right? And because a socialist is a person who is willing to fight to end capitalism, not a person who's going to build one non-capitalist institution, say a public health service, as these roses do, and then say, but we can allow these other homicidal forces to continue to exist. That's not a socialist. And you should be clear on these definitions. The distinction between a socialist and a communist then is just whether there's a gun in their hand or not. Right? Socialist is someone like Salvador Allende, who was actually trying to end capitalism, but who was doing that within this system that they had constructed there. So it's not possible, really, to be a socialist in the United States, right? It's possible to be a communist in the United States. You can fight against the worst, most destructive thing that's ever existed, the United States government. It's not possible to change that system short of that fight in a place as bad as the United States. It's not the same standard in other countries. This conversation of turning to what cybernetic communism is or is not One of the most important things that you could say that people don't say quite nearly enough is that we have to be using open source software as much as possible. The thing that is potentially transformative here, the AI agent, is not transformative under for-profit organizations. It's transformative under this open source model. And this is true across the board. We have to be using open source things as much as possible. We have to, insofar as it's possible, to fight the forces of bourgeoisie without gun in hand. It would be through things like this. The use of open source technology and open source principles and that transforming of institutions therein. But that's not nearly enough. Just as a person saying, focusing on U.S. electoral politics, we're going to somehow fix the mafia, fix the worst thing that's ever existed in a short time frame, a short date of 5 years, in a system that's been rigged so that it can't really be fixed at all, not in any time frame, not in 100 years, much less 5 years. And somehow that's going to be the focus of what we're doing, is this thing that's obviously a scam and couldn't possibly be done. Any person that's telling you that person is also a crypto-fascist, right? But again, find a person who won't say that. It's 1 in 1,000 people who you just wouldn't just execute as an American, right? And I'm not telling you to just start shooting your neighbors, right? But you need to understand the situation that you're in. You need to understand the exigency of the capitalist climate apocalypse and this climate death spiral and the various other effects stemming from it or parallel to it that we are about to face. You're going to be living in hell very soon. And almost none of you are really acting as if that's the case. Well, I want to end this conversation at least on something more like a hopeful note. This workforce multiplier and the righteous people's war generally do have the potential to transform this world into a livable world, which is one that is dominated by humane and sustainable economic systems. We have that potential. We have that possibility. And we can see something like this cursed Wileyan singularity, artificial intelligence singularity, quite easily in doing so, but not by his prescribed methods, and not by these effectively anti-communist and effectively pro-fascist stratagems. But we could build this true people's AI takeoff. It's better to say AI takeoff than singularity, just like it's better to say advanced computing than artificial intelligence, right? Those are kind of weasel words. You're incorporating a certain kind of mysticism into your thinking by using language like this. It's an intentional obfuscation on the part of technologists when they say almost every time they utter the word artificial intelligence, right? Because then it becomes a thing foreign to human beings, not a tool used by human beings, not a thing for workers. Advanced computing is a thing for workers. Artificial intelligence is a thing that you can blame when you're upholding a bourgeois system that's killing the planet. You can blame this foreign thing that somehow has a mind of its own. That's not being controlled by the bourgeoisie, as it obviously is, but it's somehow a thing unto itself, an alien force. And that's how most of these bourgeois technologists and technophiles, or the specific subset of people, X-risk people, or AI safety people, that's how they talk about this. They're insulting your intelligence, right? As if you can't obviously see that the world is run by a few oligarchs and plutocrats and corrupt individuals. You can obviously see that that's the case. But they say that even though those people built advanced computing in the West, in the U.S. primarily, and even though they control it, that somehow it's a thing separate from them, that they're not the puppet masters of that it's an alien force that threatens you. These are the dumbest fucking people that ever existed, transhumanists, right? I'm sure you've met some dumb people in your life, but you haven't met people as dumb as fucking transhumanists. It's a level of delusion that is almost incalculable. But by recognizing those things they say, which are not lies, that advanced computing is the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, but also recognizing that they're a stopped clock, the stopped clock phenomena, that they are only right about one thing for 1 hour of a day, and the other 23 hours are wrong. Stop clock phenomena. Um, this necessarily requires an immersion in not just the scientific communist project, but the cybernetic communist project to see that humanity doesn't become extinct. Harnessing this power of the massified workforce multiplier, the open source large language model agent, as a work group with 1 million+ people in it. 1 million+ people would be the number where we could see transformative effects, like stopping the institutions responsible for the capitalist climate apocalypse. In doing this, we can navigate this transition from a dying world to a livable world, which necessarily requires this AI-powered, humane, and sustainable economic system. That is a world that is not merely livable, not merely technologically advanced, but a world that has these singularitarian effects. A world where an AI takeoff leads us to effects of a positive kind that we cannot anticipate at present. The artificial intelligence singularity is near, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. For you see, my dear comrade, very soon, cybernetic communism will win. Thank you.